So, I guess I'll just open with my usual statement that my mental health is in the garbage, my productivity is in the garbage, my room is a mess, and I don't know. I'll be lucky if I don't get fired. Um, but, well, I don't really know if I can handle showing up to work every day. Anyways, so if I do, say la vie. Just gotta make it to the end of my 1 year contract, and then I'll just leave in July, a couple months. It won't be that bad. Um, but what I've most recently done is I've gone on a really bad bender of Kerbal Space Program, and there's some aspects of it that are actually a lot more realistic than I was expecting. Because I knew I knew it as a meme, but I'd never actually played Kerbal as a game. Um, Yeah, so I only knew it from all the gifs of ridiculous rocket launches and things people do. But I didn't realize that the orbits are all like you know completely real. The reason is that it's easy to simulate, right? And it's in fact it's not even like I mean it's a simulation in the sense that it's like a you know a mathematical representation of something, but it's not like normally when you say simulation, I think like something where it's a problem that can't be solved in pencil and paper, and so the computer runs some numerical calculation to get an approximation. Um, with orbits, there's exact mathematical solutions, and the game can just you know calculate whatever conic section of an orbit you happen to be on. So yeah, there's you're on one of these, right? There's circles, ellipses, parabolas, and hyperbolas, right? So you can see circle and then increasingly eccentric orbits of ellipses. But these are all completely solvable, and so the aspect of the game that involves doing that is actually very realistic. And if you want to go somewhere in the Kerbin solar system, you really gotta actually like plan your maneuvers correctly. There's things called maneuver nodes that are uh, essentially you just tell the game, if I add this much velocity in this direction at this point in time, I want to know what my trajectory will be, and then the game will tell you what your new trajectory would be, and then you decide if that will take you where you want to go or not, and then it'll tell you which direction to point the spacecraft to do a burn to do that. Anyways, it's quite fun, and more realistic than I thought, and I've gone on quite a bender playing it. But there's a lot of things that it 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 does bring up that I had thought about. And now part of the reason I got so addicted to the game is that I wanted to try them. Um, One of which is that there's a lot of things like if you want to do a plane change maneuver. So say I got a globe here. There's use the paper globe. So say you're orbiting the Earth. Where's there's North America. So you're orbiting the Earth. What would be a prograde? Yeah, so this would be a prograde orbit. So say you're orbiting the Earth around the equator. Well, now say you want to orbit the Earth around the poles instead, right? You want to, instead of going in an east-west orbit, you want to go in a north-south orbit, which most things go, orbiting, flying to the east, but you could fly north-south, and some satellites do this, right? If you want to get an image of the entire Earth, right, you orbit the poles, and then the Earth will rotate under you, and then you'll get a different slice every time until eventually, actually, not unlike the way this globe is made, right? We see each of these sections, right? So you kind of, orbit around one of these sections, and then the Earth rotates, and you orbit around the next one, so you get a 360-degree. So say you want to change from one of those orbits to the other. So you want to do what's called a plane change maneuver, right? So you're you know you're orbiting in yeah you're orbiting in this plane, and then like this, and then you want to orbit instead in this plane like this. So same shape, but flipped 90 degrees. So it turns out that the best way to do that is to go from an orbit like this to an orbit like this. So say raise your apogee, right? Because basically the higher your orbit, the slower you're going. And so there's fun things like, it actually, like down here you might be orbiting it, these are made up numbers, but well, they could be real depending on the orbital altitudes, right? So say down here you're orbiting at 2,000 meters per second, up here you're only orbiting at 500 meters per second, right? So if you want to do a plane change, say if you want to do a plane change maneuver down here, well then, you need to change your direction. It's not like changing a plane's direction in the air where you can use aerodynamic forces to redirect your momentum, but keep your energy constant. No, no, no. If you want to change your momentum, you just got to change your momentum by doing a burn. And it's about the least efficient, one of the least efficient things you can do. Right, but so if you only so say down here you are going 2,000 meters per second this way, now, or say you're going 2,000 meters per second this way. Now you want to go 2,000 meters per second this way. So not only do you have to accelerate 2,000 meters per second this way, you actually have to decelerate 2,000 meters per second back the other way to cancel out your forward velocity. Versus if you first, you might only have to spend, say 600 meters per second to get up here, where it's 500 meters per second, and then so down here you'd have to spend 4,000. But if you spend an extra 600, you get up here, and then you only have to spend, 1,000 um, meters per second. So that's a total of 1,600 if you go up here, versus a total of 4,000 if you try to do it down here. So there's fun things like that. Also, another interesting thing, right? So saying like you have to cancel out your forward velocity. So it's actually, so if you want to do a 90-degree plane change maneuver, so go from horizontal, say an orbit that go around the equator horizontally to an orbit that goes around the poles vertically, that costs just as much delta V as actually going into a completely retrograde orbit. It takes just as much rocket fuel to go a 90-degree turn as it does a 180-degree turn, right? So if you want to change the plane of your orbit from like this to like this, that's actually just as difficult as going like this to turning around and going the other way, right? So either way, you've got to cancel out, your complete forward velocity and then create it in another direction. In fact, every direction greater than a 90-degree turn costs exactly the same, because it's basically deorbiting all the way to zero speed and then putting yourself into a brand new orbit. So plane change maneuvers are extremely costly. That's why it's important to launch into the correct plane and at the correct time and all these other things. It's one of the many reasons that you want to do it, and that's actually the more important reason about launching from lower latitudes. It has less to do with the fact with picking it. I mean, it's nice to pick up an extra 1,000. I mean, yeah, that's an extra 1,000 miles an hour you pick up for being at the equator versus the poles, the Earth rotating that you get for free. But it's more about the fact that plane change maneuvers are expensive, and if you launch from the poles, you can't be in an equatorial orbit, can you? But from the equator, you can go anywhere. From the equator, you can launch towards the poles just fine. But from the poles, you can't launch in an orbit that would go around the equator. So the equator gives you the most options without having to do any plane change maneuvers once you're in orbit, which are very costly. But there's another thing, which is it's come up a few times recently that people don't actually know what the terms trans and cis mean. So when I heard those things, right? So it's like when I heard homosexual and heterosexual, and when I heard transgender and cisgender, I immediately knew what people were talking about. In fact, and I think in the case of trans people, like before I actually understood about myself for what the term meant, I actually when people first used the word cis, then I immediately understood why it was called that. I was like, why is it called trans? I was like, oh, well, people say so because I was familiar with those terms from geometry and chemistry, and they're ultimately from Latin. So a lot of people for whatever reason think that the trans and transgender comes from the word transition, which it does not at all actually. They do vaguely share a common root, but it's not because of the transition process. It's because of well, something that actually comes up in orbits as well. Which is that, so it's, I guess let's brief language and history moment here. So um, trans and cis in Latin mean basically same side and different sides. So they would refer to things as transalpine and cisalpine. So cisalpine meant everything that was south of the Alpines, the Alp mountains. And so, everything that was cisalpine was on the same side of the Alps as Rome. So, basically everything in Italy. And then there was everything that was transalpine. They would talk about cisalpine and transalpine Gaul. So cisalpine Gaul would be like just basically northern Italy. Um, and then transalpine Gaul would be like France. And so transalpine then was everything on the other side of the Alps. And so in chemistry, oh, I didn't draw a diagram for chemistry. Let me draw a molecule diagram too. I drew one for the orbits. We're just going to use whatever crappy piece of paper I have lying around. So, but it's the difference of, do you have, all right, I find a piece of paper with more, but it's the difference of, are things on the same side or different sides? So in chemistry, there's, oh, there we go. So in chemistry, it's the difference of when you have things like double bonds. So if you know any organic chemistry, these are representations of bonds between carbon atoms and other things, but generally carbon. Right. So this boxy thing is supposed to be a double bond, and these lines are single bonds. So basically, you can have a molecule like ethylene, like two carbons that have a double bond between them, and then they both have two hydrogens. So that can either look like this or like this, right? So you can either have this configuration where there's sort of like the double bond makes things face towards this. Actually, this couldn't be ethylene then. These would have to be methyl groups. So this would be, I don't know, propyl. No, this would be butyl. This would be, yeah. So this would be trans and cis butylene. So if you want to, so yeah, so but if it's on the same side like this, right? So there's these are both carbon, there's 4 carbon atoms, right? So if these 2 ones on the end point out in the same direction, it's called a cis molecule, and if they point out in opposite direction, it's called the trans molecule. And this is what people are talking about when they refer to trans fats. It's fat molecules with a particular double bond where these are carbon bonds that then have other stuff attached to them. So depending on whether or not the things on either side of the double bond face opposite sides, those are trans fats. And if they face the same side, those are cis fats. Yeah, so but this also comes up in orbits. So there's 2 ways you basically, if you're going like in an orbit between Earth and the Moon, you're going around both. There's basically 2 ways, right? So there's cislunar orbit, which is where you just go around both of them, right? And then there's translunar orbits, where you do this figure-8 type thing, right? You go around the Earth one direction, and then you kind of hook around in such a way that you go around the Moon the other direction. Then you could just go around like this in a relatively stable orbit. Well, actually, it's not that stable, but you can go through it at least once. This isn't actually perfectly stable either. But so, I mean, it becomes reasonably stable if this one becomes very, very large. But at that point, you're just orbiting the Earth at a very high altitude that's higher than the Moon. But so yeah, so that's the other example is right. So this is the trans orbit where you trans, right, cross between, and then the cis one where you just keep going on the same side and you just turn around only at the endpoints. So yeah, that's the difference between trans and cis. And there's orbits and molecules for you. So yeah, I finally uninstalled the game this morning. Got a meeting in a couple of hours. I actually do have some materials prepared for it, but yeah, I am a terrible human being, incredibly lazy, world's worst employee, and honestly, kind of a just disappointing person. Not a particularly amazing friend. Uh, Generally a problem. But yeah, so anyways, almost got to throw my mental health notes in there. But yeah, so if you're curious what trans assist meant, um, some things about orbits, there you go.